Hi, I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
And this time we're going to study abroad and leave logic and reason behind as we discuss Dario Argento's hallucinogenic horror classic Suspiria from 1977.
Roses are red, violets are blue, but the iris is the flower that will mean the end of it.
You can run from Suspiria. You can hide from Suspiria. Suspiria. But you cannot escape Suspiria. The only thing more terrifying than the last 12 minutes of Suspiria are the first 92.
Dance student Susie Banyan arrives in Germany to study at a prestigious dance academy, but finds her experience an unsettling one from her first night. A student is viciously murdered, maggots rain from the ceiling, and Susie experiences fainting spells. Becoming convinced of some strange conspiracy involving the sinister teaching staff and a legendary witch, Susie attempts to uncover the secrets hidden behind the school's walls and learn the truth before she becomes the next victim. As usual, we're going to be discussing Suspiria and all its accompanying weirdness in detail, so if you haven't seen the film and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the movie before listening to the rest of this episode. A little basic info. So Suspiria was released on February 1st, 1977 in Italy, and August 12th, 1977 in the US. It was filmed for a budget of $1.1 million. The box office was 1.4 trillion lira and 1.8 million US dollars. The movie was nominated for a Saturn Award for Joan Bennett's performance as Best Supporting Actress, and it was the first in Argento's loosely connected Three Mothers trilogy, which also includes Inferno and Mother of Tears. Okay, so Corinne, what's your history with this movie?
I saw this movie when I was 17, and I had just had my wisdom teeth out, and they put me on some kind of painkiller. I think it was codeine. And I was so sick, and I had the TV on. I was watching episodes of Star Trek, and I put in this movie called Suspiria. So I'd wake up, and horrible things would be happening on the screen. I'd fall back asleep. I'd wake up again, and even worse things would be happening on the screen. This movie terrified me for years, and I hadn't even seen the whole thing. So I don't think I saw the entire film as it is meant to be seen, although people could argue that I saw it the way it was meant to be seen. But I didn't see the full movie from beginning to end until my early 20s.
See, this is a demented movie enough as it is. I can't imagine it with chemical accompaniment.
It was horrific.
For me, it's funny. This is a movie that it took some time to grow on me. I actually didn't get into it the first time I saw it. The first time I rented it, I don't know if it was the fact it was VHS and a bad copy and cropped and the colors were just off and it looked out of focus, but I just thought it was kind of garish and not really very good looking. I got like a half hour in and just lost interest.
That surprises me. It's a beautiful film.
Well, I saw it again later on DVD and it was a lot closer to, I think, what it was supposed to look like. Widescreen, better color. And I enjoyed it. It was still, I think it was also that point where as a movie viewer I was much more into plot and logic and things like that. And I hadn't quite embraced the idea of films that cast aside the idea of normal plot progression in favor of mood and atmosphere. So it took me a little time to get my head in the right space from that. I mean, I had the same problem with David Lynch movies when I first saw them. Constantly like, oh, I know there's a plot here. I know there's a story. I can find it. So then the next time I saw it was on the big screen at one of the big horror movie marathons here, and that's when it finally really clicked for me. The music, the cinematography, everything just really worked.
I still haven't seen this one on the big screen. It's played a few times in the area. I just haven't managed to get to it.
Someday. We will get there. All right, let's talk about the characters. We have Jessica Harper, of course, as the lead character, Susie Banyan. And I love Argento actually casting an American actress as the lead in this movie to have a lead who's completely a fish out of water, totally in a different environment, which makes everything a little bit crazier and a little bit scarier for her.
She may have been one of the only English-speaking actors on set, or fluent English-speaking actresses, but she wasn't the only person that he'd hired from another country. I know there were some actors from Italy, there were some actors from Germany, so he had a really broad range of languages. So I think that actually did help, because when they're dubbed and we can hear they're speaking American in the dubbed versions, but the actors aren't speaking the same language to each other. So some of the confused reactions add to that atmosphere.
And the dubbing actually leads to a lot of really strange line readings that I think add to the atmosphere as well.
Yeah, but getting back to Jessica Harper, she was fresh off of the De Palma Phantom of the Paradise, which I adore and you should go see. But they have very similar things going on. She plays the ingenue in both of them, and she's kind of thrust into a new world. And they have the connection with the strong use of color. So it was almost like, well, we're going to take Jessica Harper, who has done this thing and did it really well, and we're going to put her in a completely different situation. But she's still kind of the same person in this movie.
She's very good at playing the wide-eyed innocent.
Yes.
And watching it, I realized that for a good 3/4 of the movie, she is a very passive character.
Oh, yeah.
Part of that is the things that are happening to her. She's suddenly afflicted with these weird dizzy spells. The implication is that she's being drugged by the staff there. She's constantly in and out of consciousness in a lot of scenes.
Well, we are very strongly told that she has a strong will, and once she makes up her mind, she sticks to it. And she does. We see she does not want to live on campus. She wants to live in one of the off-campus apartments.
Susie!
Good morning, Madam Blank.
I've got good news for you. We have it all arranged. Your room is ready for you.
Oh,
Isn't that marvelous? You can move in today if you like.
but I'd rather stay at Olga's if it's okay.
Doesn't matter to me, my dear, but in your letter of enrollment, you said you'd be boarding at the school.
I know, but...
The room is free now.
Well, I didn't think it was so important.
As you wish. If that's what you want, so be it. I had no idea you were so strong-willed. I see that when you make up your mind about something, nothing will change it for you. My compliments.
And she's manipulated into staying at the school. She's basically forced to stay at the school, and she's upset about that. Beyond that, she's drugged, she's reacting to things that are happening to her, but she still does try to seek out the mystery. So while she has a very passive arc in the middle of the movie, she's active both in the beginning and in the end.
It seems like it's the disappearance of Sarah that really starts to motivate her. For
Yeah.
the middle of the movie, Sarah's the one who's really interested in what's going on in the school and is trying to get Susie involved. And then once she's plucked out of the picture, that really, I think, motivates Susie to start taking action.
There's a very interesting progression of the story. Like, the story is told by Pat to Sarah, and when Pat disappears, Sarah takes up the hunt, and Sarah tells the story to Susie, and when Sarah disappears, Susie takes it up. And unfortunately, we don't see very much of Jessica Harper anymore, which makes me so sad. She had too brief of a cameo in Minority Report, playing the mother of the psychic Agatha, but I can't think of anything I've seen her in since then.
Yeah, the only other ones that spring to mind are like in the 80s and 90s. My Favorite Year
Yeah.
with Peter O'Toole and Safe. And she feels like if she was willing, she'd be the type of actress who a lot of directors would want to cast in horror movies in cameo bits or in roles like that, sort of as a homage to this movie and the other one she was in.
Yeah, I vaguely recall that I think she's writing cookbooks now. Obviously, we wish her the best.
A couple things that I do think are kind of funny. Because of the fact that everyone is speaking different languages in a lot of scenes, particularly the scene where she has that conversation with Professor Milius. Apparently, because he was speaking German and she had to respond in English, she had a lot of trouble keeping a straight face. You wouldn't know it looking at the scene because she looks very grave and concerned, but she kept bursting out laughing just because it was such a strange experience.
It is, but like we mentioned, it really does add to the otherness of the film.
And also, supposedly some of the fear in her face during the finale when she's running out of the school as it's starting to blow up was real, because a lot of those explosions you can see are really close to her. There's like glass shattering right next to her face in a couple shots.
Yeah, hopefully they used safety glass.
I would hope so, but you never know. Internationally, the safety regulations seem to be a little lax sometimes.
Yeah.
Before she was cast, Tina Allman, who appeared in the Italian horror movie Torso, was actually considered but declined due to scheduling conflicts.
I can't imagine anybody else doing this role.
And I like that the cast is mostly women. I mean, you do have some male parts, but they're kind of supporting ones off to the side.
They are definitely off to the side. This is all about women and their interaction with other women. much like fairy tales, and I know we'll get much more in depth with the fairy tales and themes in this film, but the idea that women are fighting women and women are fighting witches, children are fighting witches, strange things happen, they're all very fairy tale like.
And the men are sort of, when they're in there, they're kind of ineffectual or henchmen, or that's about it.
In most fairy tales, the men are there as the rescuer, or they're there as the prize. I mean, there are certainly, most fairy tales as well have the woman as a prize because she's rescued, but the end game for many fairy tales is marriage.
In terms of these women working together, I love the relationship between Susie and Sarah, played by Stefania Cassini.
They tell each other stories like they're in a campfire in the woods at camp. This scary story, and they scare each other. And it feels very young to me, but also this strange kind of camaraderie.
She's very friendly and nice, but we realize as the film goes on that she has this fear behind her, knowing what happened to Pat Hingle. God, that makes me laugh every time I say that, because all I can picture is the actor who played Commissioner Gordon in this girls' school.
Oh.
But she has this fear knowing that something is going on, and the death of Pat kind of confirms, okay, this thing, whatever it's happening, is real.
Because I was Pat's friend. She was telling me something when you suddenly showed up. She got scared and she ran away. She was in hysterics almost. And then she was killed. Remember that voice when you rang the bell? Well, that was me.
Yeah, it sparks off a great paranoia in her, and she makes a lot of very bad decisions because she's in a panic.
And especially later on when we find out that she was seeing a psychiatrist, she had an emotional breakdown. So we start to wonder, okay, how much of what she's saying can we trust? Is she paranoid? A viewer seeing this for the first time might wonder, is she actually killing people? Is she part of this or something? We're not totally sure.
Stefania actually has one of the worst scenes for me. One of those times I woke up in my tooth surgery pain medication haze was the barbed wire scene.
Ugh.
I woke up just in time to see her climb through the window and fall into the barbed wire, and she was in agony. She was being ripped apart and just slashed. And then, of course, at the end of that scene, her throat is slashed. But obviously it's not real barbed wire. What we're actually seeing is kind of a thicker gauge regular wire. But it turns out that the actress had trouble with the scene because the wire, even though it wasn't barbed wire, was still pinching her skin. So some of what we saw on screen was genuine pain. That makes me a little sad.
It does. It's horrible to watch because she's right next to this open door that offers escape. And the more she gets closer to it, the more tangled she gets. And you keep thinking, oh, she's going to get free. Nope. Get stuck in there again. Yeah.
Well, she may have gotten free, but the murderer got to her before that could happen. So she was basically, it was almost like the briar patch situation where she can't get out now that she's in, but she couldn't find a way out. Which
might also make a nice metaphor for them in the school in general. It does make me wonder, though, what are they doing with this wire in the middle of this room? It's spread out all over the floor. It doesn't seem very efficient.
But it's also through kind of a secret passage, and it seems like maybe that was a room set up to trap people if they got too close.
That could be.
Because she was driven to that.
And I do notice there's like other sharp things on the wall, almost like it's a storage thing. So
yeah.
Let's move on to Joan Bennett as Madame Blanc. Is she like co-director, I think, of the school, or co-directress?
The directress is the witch. She's kind of the associate or the assistant director, so she's one level below.
She's kind of the public face of the school.
She's like the vice principal of the school.
I think it's interesting how some of the other characters, like especially Miss Tanner, are really imposing and creepy, and yet Madame Blanc, at least on the surface, is very charming and friendly, and you can imagine her at like fundraisers trying to grease people for money for the school or something like that.
Oh, that brings us back to the fairy tale aspect, to Snow White and the queen. The evil queen was beautiful. She was elegant. She was a queen. And we're getting the same tone out of the character of Madame Blanc.
She's very friendly to Susie and everything and very warm. So it's a real shock when later on, as Susie gets into the bowels of the school and finds her in this room talking about how, I want that American bitch dead. It's kind of like, whoa.
We must get rid of that bitch of an American girl. Vanish. She must vanish. Make her disappear. Understand? She must die. Die. Die.
But just this idea of somebody who's so welcoming on the outside and is really like plotting your doom on the inside, it's pretty hairy.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the Severus Snape kind of thing, where the character who looks evil isn't necessarily evil, or not as evil as you perceive them to be by appearance and behavior.
As for Joan Bennett, she also appeared in film noir thrillers directed by Fritz Lang, like The Woman in the Window and Scarlet Street, which is apparently one of the reasons Argento wanted her for the role. He was a big Fritz Lang fan. Also on the teaching staff, and a lot more sinister, we have Alida Valli as Miss Tanner. Valli, back when she was actually credited as just Valli, had roles in The Miracle of the Bells. She was Orson Welles' girlfriend in Third Man, Eyes Without a Face, 1900, and The Cassandra Crossing. And as soon as she shows up with that rigid demeanor, the hairstyle, the black dress, you're just like, oh my God, this woman is trouble.
Yeah, I had the feeling that if we were going to get a remake, which apparently we are, and that's really depressing, I think she would be played now by either Kate Mulgrew or Jessica Lange.
Yeah, I could see either of those cast in that part.
Yeah.
There's something, I hate to say it, there's something vaguely Nazi about her, though.
There is.
And we see her as kind of a harsh teacher, and the only time we really see them doing a dance lesson. But all of her reactions to things are a little overblown. The scene where she's kicking out Daniel, the blind man, because of the incident with her dog, the way she acts is just crazed.
Your lousy, disgusting dog has bitten Albert. He took a piece out of Albert's arm.
What?
Did you all hear that? That miserable dog tried to mutilate a child. Madame Blanc had to rush Albert to a first aid center to have stitches put in.
That's impossible.
Let's go to the first aid center. Even if you can't see the blood, at least you can hear that poor child's crying.
Yeah, there are a lot of events in the film that didn't really need to be there and didn't really further the plot, but did give us more chills. The scene where we find out that the dog bit Madame Blanc's nephew, then that's why the blind piano teacher gets kicked out, and then the blind piano teacher is murdered. It doesn't further our plot at all. It's just giving us an example of how petty and cruel the women here are.
For a coven of, we'd assume, decently powerful witches, they don't seem to be in control much. A lot of strange stuff happens that they seem really surprised by. The whole thing with the maggots, that seems to take them kind of off guard.
Yeah, I wonder, though, if there's something edited out, because when I saw this, the first time I saw the maggots dropping down, I thought when they went up, they were going to find, bodies of the women that they'd killed.
That's what I thought, too.
And then we do see meat, and it's in the attic. It's very confusing.
In a trunk in the attic.
I know, it's so confusing because it's a trunk in the attic and it's meat and maggots, and they claim that it was a shipment of food. What is it doing in the attic? And why is it just literally in a crate, not refrigerated?
I don't know.
So I think it may have been, and now we're going to have maggots dropped from the ceiling. So I guess there's to be meat up there. If they had thought through just slightly more, there would have been a body.
Yeah. I know it seems like it's mostly there as an excuse to get the directress downstairs and start the whole thing about the footsteps and where they go in the school.
Exactly. It's a plot device to get the characters where they need to go, but it could have been done slightly smoother.
There's a couple other scenes with Miss Tanner that I think are interesting. There's one where Madame Blanc is having a conversation with Susie, and Miss Tanner just suddenly shows up in the doorway and is staring urgently, and Madame Blanc has to go, I want to talk with her alone. Go ahead. Go by. Every once in a while, you almost sense there's this conflict between the two of them.
Well, it shows the hierarchy, how Miss Tanner wants to be involved in that situation, in the Susie situation, but is being forced out by Madame Blanc.
You almost feel like she's kind of the point person. Whenever there's a problem, she's the one who has to deal with it in some way.
She's the heavy.
Yeah. She's the muscle, basically. Like, okay, we have an issue. Miss Tanner, go take care of this. And this is one situation where Madame Blanc feels she has to handle it personally. And she's just kind of standing like, well, what do? I want to do something. I want to hurt somebody.
Why aren't we doing this right now?
Come on, let's do it.
She's right there. Let's do it.
We'll get a guy. He'll put on black gloves. He'll stab her. It'll be great. Come on. He doesn't have a big part, but I do want to bring up Miguel Bose as Mark, because it almost seems like he's a red herring. He's the handsome handyman guy around the school, and they keep building him up in the movie like there's going to be a romance between him and Susie. And I think it's interesting that it never happens.
Well, there are a couple of reasons. I mean, he would kind of be the Prince Charming of a fairy tale, but to subvert that expectation, we're given the insinuation that he's gay. The girls kind of talk about, well, they've heard, and the implication is that he's gay.
But everything about how he acts around it does seem to indicate he's interested.
Yes, so there's a lot of mixed signals with his character.
I kept thinking, watching it, if he wasn't going to turn out to rescue in the end, he was going to turn out to be the bad guy, or maybe even the guy who's doing the majority of the murders that we see. So I was kind of surprised that instead he just sort of vanishes. We never really find out what happens to him. We assume he's out of the school with the rest of the students going to this performance that they talk about in the last act. But that's it. We also have Flavio Bucci as Daniel, the blind piano player. He's another odd character in that you first see him and he's a blind man, so there's kind of this level of vulnerability, but I thought there's going to be something creepy about him too, that either he's going to be faking blindness or there's going to be just something weird and strange about him. But he is sort of an innocent guy in this.
He is, but I don't think he's as innocent as you think. When he's being forced out, he makes it a point of saying over and over very strongly, I'm blind, but I can hear. I'm blind, but I'm not deaf.
Out! I'm going. But try to understand that I'm blind, not deaf. Get it? Huh? Not deaf. Not deaf, you understand that? You understand?
And I think he would have survived this being kicked out of the school ordeal if he hadn't said that, because I think they took that as a threat. He heard things that were going on.
Well, it depends on how much he actually heard. Is it a matter of, like Sarah, he just has suspicions about things? Or
It's
does
possible,
he actually know?
but it shows us that they're not willing to take a risk.
And also his reaction in that scene where he's being kicked out, just like, fresh air. You almost get the sense he's taken a lot of shit from Tanner or Madame Blanc or the staff in general.
Yeah.
He just seems really happy to be out of there finally.
And maybe he was too afraid to leave.
Maybe like they hint with Mark that somehow they had him under their thumb for whatever reason. Next we come to one of the more unsettling performances for me in the movie, Udo Kier as Dr. Frank Mandel. And not unsettling because of anything that Udo does in the film, just because of the fact it's Udo Kier, and yet he's dubbed with this American accent. And Kier has such a distinctive voice that I see this kind of voice. Well, here's what it means, Susie. And my brain just goes, no, wrong. I mean, he's great for the one little scene he has, but it's just really strange to hear this other voice coming out of there.
What does it mean to be a witch?
Well, as a believer in the material world and a psychiatrist to boot, I'm convinced that the current spread of belief in magic and the occult is part of mental illness. Bad luck isn't brought by broken mirrors, but by broken minds.
Now, what purpose did he serve? Who was he?
He's the contact that Sarah had, her former psychiatrist. So on the one hand, he throws a little doubt on whether Sarah is rational when she has all these suspicions, but he also points Susie toward Professor Milius, who gives the real background on witchcraft and things like that. He's part of the info dump about Helena Marcos. And I guess to serve as sort of another fake possible knight who's going to save her in the end, because she calls towards the end when she's starting to find out all this weird stuff going on, and all of a sudden the phone connection breaks.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost another fake out of, he's going to be the guy who's going to rescue her later. No, he isn't.
He's a younger guy, and you think, maybe this is the love interest. So we've got the hints at possible love interests, but we're backing way away from that. I think he has the most speaking lines of any of the male characters.
Supposedly Kier was such a last-minute choice for this role, he didn't have time to learn any of the lines, so since they were shooting without sound anyway, he actually had a crew member feeding him each line as he was talking to Susie. So you can't see it, but there's a guy right out of camera just whispering in his ear, and then he'd say the line right back to her. The other academic psychiatrist, Professor Milius, is played by Rudolf Schundler. And I love how this guy basically takes it as a granted that, yes, witchcraft is real, evil is in the world everywhere. Everybody knows this. This is an obvious thing.
Skepticism is the natural reaction of people nowadays. But magic is ever present. In other words, quandam ubique, quandam semper, quandam ad omnibus creditor est, which means that magic is everywhere and all over the world. It's a recognized fact, always.
And he seems kind of delighted that Susie is so interested in it. That the idea that somebody's actually really desperately wants his help. The whole speech he has, he's talking about this creepy stuff, but he's got this kind of gleam in his eye.
Well, you can kind of get the idea that everybody has been poo-pooing his theories and his work his entire life, and now he has somebody who, you know, young and attractive, who is very invested in this information. This is his moment.
His moment of plot exposition.
Yes.
He's going to love it.
The two men with the most lines, they're just there for exposition.
And then they leave the movie. They
and
graciously leave
the
movie. The last major character, who's actually played by a combination of people, is Helena Marcos, or Mother Superiorum.
Or the Black Queen.
Her physical form is played by Leila Svasta. The voice of her, at least for the Italian version, was actually dubbed by screenwriter Dario Nicolodi. Supposedly, Argento cast her. She was this elderly former prostitute that he met on the street and decided she'd be perfect and cast her and put her in makeup.
This was according to Jessica Harper. Nobody can actually confirm this, and I don't doubt her, but I kind of hate the idea that she's known as a 90-year-old ex-prostitute. It's like, it makes me sad that we know nothing else about her.
I know. Well, that's the thing. When I was researching this movie, I found most of the information is very liquidy. It's like one person says one thing, one person says another. It's hard to confirm a lot of it.
I know we briefly watched part of a documentary, and both Dario Argento and Daria Nicolodi tried to claim ownership of the same ideas. So there's a lot of conflict of who did what, and some of it I'm sure is ego and some of it is memory, but you know, we can only go on what information we have.
In the American, or the international version of this at least, with the dubbing, I find it's funny that Helena Marcos's dialogue comes across really crazy, almost like she's desperately trying to convince Susie that she's doomed. Like, yeah, now you're going to die. Death is behind that door. You're going to meet death, which to me almost sounds like she realizes this woman is 5 feet from her, can very easily kill her and destroy her, and that'll be it. So she has to basically fake her out into thinking that there's nothing she can do about it.
Right.
Because it comes across as so over the top, her ranting about, you know, now you die. Ah.
I'd like to mention a character we haven't mentioned at all yet, and that's Dr. Vertigast.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Dr. Vertigast, or Wertigast, because they kind of pronounce it differently in the movie. He is the doctor the witches call upon to take care of Susie after her fainting spell. And he's the one who prescribes the wine that we can assume has a sedative in it. And he gives her an injection. And it seems like she passes out after the injection. So we can assume that was a high potency sedative as well. So the name Vertigast, at first when I heard it, I thought it was Vertighost. So I was like, oh, Vertigo, that could be interesting. But no, Vertigast is possibly a reference to Bela Lugosi's character in the 1934 Black Cat.
Holy shit.
Dr. Vitus Vertigast in the film was a Hungarian psychiatrist who treats the injury of a young woman with hyoscine, and that's a tranquilizer. The woman begins behaving erratically, and the movie has a lot to do with satanic rituals.
It does. I do remember that one.
So if that was on purpose, well done.
Given Argento's love of classic movies that we see, how the way he quotes things and other things, it would not surprise me at all. When that character shows up, the only other thing I could think of was Ralph Bellamy from Rosemary's Baby, the friendly doctor who's like, here, I'll take care of you. Just take this. Everything will be great.
Yes.
This idea of this person of authority that you're supposed to trust and who's going to make everything okay, who's making everything a lot worse and is part of this sinister cabal.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the man himself, Dario Argento. As a director, I found, like I said, he was an acquired taste for me, but I've grown to really, really like his work. Let's face it, the emphasis is a lot less on story and plot and character than atmosphere and mood and visuals, and that's just what he's really, really great at.
He seems to come from the surrealist school of film. I think he picks up where a lot of those directors left off in terms of storytelling through visuals rather than story.
It reminds me a lot of stories about Alfred Hitchcock and Ridley Scott. A lot of these directors who are much more interested in composing a great frame, telling a story through a single image, and kind of leave the actors to do their thing. I mean, they help out when they can, but I think they'd much prefer the actors just kind of read what's on the page, figure out the character, do it themselves. Which I know is a problem for certain actors, but if you get the right actors who are a little bit more into self-reliance, the combination can work out great, and I think it does certainly in this film.
He has at least a dozen just perfect, gorgeous shots in this movie. At least a dozen.
Yeah, I'd say much more than a dozen.
I know, I'm underselling it because I can't give you an idea of how, but just so many of them, if you just freeze the frame, it's like you know what's going on, you know the mood of the whole movie. It's just incredible.
And then so many of his movies are punctuated by really elaborate, creatively depicted murders.
Yes. He has quite an imagination for murder.
Like the opening murder, okay, it's enough she gets stabbed. No, it's not going to end there, though. Okay, she's going to get stabbed, and she's going to have a rope thrown around her neck.
Tossed through a window.
Her heart's stabbed out, tossed through. She's going to fall just so that the rope wraps around her neck and hangs her. It's like, talk about overkill.
Yeah, and the glass takes out the witness as collateral damage.
I mean, it's almost Rube Goldberg-like sometimes
Yes.
in how these murders occur, and the beautiful ways that he films them, too. To the point where he's gotten a lot of flack from people, especially because so many of his movies seem to focus on women being killed in gruesome ways.
Yeah.
And I think Argento became conscious of this. I mean, Tenebrae is basically about a guy fighting perception of his work as being violent and misogynist.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
at the very least, he was self-aware to realize that and start to comment on that and work those ideas into the stories themselves. But this is also him starting to move into outright supernatural, fantastic stories, because most of his other ones had been more or less kind of straight murder mystery type films. Well, all right, not straight murder mysteries, but murder mysteries nonetheless with a lot of crazy, bizarre stuff.
This is the Argento I know. This capturing of the fantastic. That's what I want to see.
And that sense of a dream, of dream logic, that really seems to come into play with this movie, and I think keeps going for the rest of his career.
And it's very difficult to film things that are dreams or dream-like. He just does it perfectly. Shots will line up so that you're looking down a tunnel, or you turn a corner and there's a secret passageway, and it has kind of a dream logic to it.
Something will appear in the background and disappear really quickly.
Yeah.
Or also the way he lays in things that are going to be important later. In this movie, there's constant shots of the lighter that Sarah has, which is basically our way of knowing that Pablo is the guy who actually killed Sarah.
Right. When Susie's meeting with Madame Blanc, the room that they meet in is framed so that they're sitting on either side, and straight through the middle you see the irises on the wall in the background, the irises that become quite important to solving the mystery.
And then also in the scene where Susie first gets to the school and Pat is running out and screams about the irises, in certain prints of the movie, not all of them, you can actually hear her say it. This idea that this tiny little detail, watch closely because this is going to be important later. And a lot of audience members aren't going to notice it, but those who do might start to figure out what's going on a little sooner. That runs through a lot of his films. On this film, it's interesting because supposedly he actually filmed very few takes for most scenes in the movie just because he wanted to use this very special ASA film stock, like a 40 ASA film stock, and they didn't have a great supply of it. So basically he had to conserve it and use it very sparingly. So he only did a few takes on most scenes.
What was the purpose of using that particular film?
It had to do with the fact they were going to use the 3-strip Technicolor, so the colors would pop and be a lot more vibrant than they should be normally.
And they do. These are some of the most gorgeous colors on screen.
Argento, of course, also, well, maybe co-wrote the screenplay, as you were mentioning. That's where things get a little thorny. It's him and his girlfriend at the time, Dario Nicolodi.
He's credited as co-writing the screenplay.
Yeah, they had a very tempestuous relationship. She was primarily an actress and actually started as the female lead in Deep Red right before this. And supposedly she was the one who suggested that he move away from the straight giallo murder movies into something more fantastic and supernatural, and that the basic story of the film came from a story her grandmother told her from when she was in a music academy and found out that the teaching staff there were actually teaching black arts to the students and that she fled and ran away. And she suggested this story to them. They wrote the screenplay, and then supposedly in later years, Dario claimed that wasn't true and that he actually came up with the idea while touring Europe and seeing all these historical magic locations. I tend to believe her a little bit more on this one, but...
I have no idea. I'm just going to take it at face value and assume that it's a combination of the two. That she suggested the story, he suggested the location, they came together with story elements, and out came Suspiria.
And some of the story elements also came from the book Suspiria de Profundis, supposedly by Thomas de Quincey. And there's an essay in there, Lavanna and Our Ladies of Sorrow, which describes these three companions to Lavanna, the Roman goddess of childbirth. Those companions being Our Lady of Tears, Our Lady of Sighs, and Our Lady of Darkness, the names of which correspond to Argento's three mothers.
This movie being Our Lady of Sighs.
Which is funny because on the soundtrack there's a lot of sighing noises, especially when Susie is running around the school at the end of the movie when she finds the secret passage. I don't know if that was an intentional sort of auditory clue or not, but I like it. Also, originally, when they wrote the film, the idea was that the students at the school were going to be a lot younger, like 12 and 13. And when they realized that wouldn't really go well with the violence on screen, they aged up the characters but didn't really change the dialogue. So you have a lot of scenes with the students saying things that sound very childish and silly.
They do. They play it very, very young. But I know that in the set pieces, doorknobs would be placed higher so that the actresses, who are fully grown women, have to reach up to turn the doorknobs like children would reach up. And it's a very nice moment that even though we know they're women, these are children.
It also adds to the fairy tale quality of it as well. And this idea that to somebody like Helena Marcos, who it's assumed has been around for hundreds of years, they are children.
Yeah.
But some of that dialogue, the whole thing about snakes.
Susie. Sarah. I once read that names which begin with the letter S are the names of snakes.
And they just keep going back and forth. And Susie's right in the middle, just like, what the hell am I walked into?
Yeah. It seems like the women lose their maturity when they enter the school.
Which adds an interesting cast to that last shot of Susie leaving the school and this big smile spreading on her face. Sort of like she's gotten past this, she's moving on with her life.
And there are times that she leaves the confines of the school, but because she's still affiliated with the school, she's in that world. When she walks out at the end of the movie, she is done with that world. That world is gone. She's just walking away.
Another interesting thing on the script level, I thought it was strange that the villains, we don't really get a huge insight into their motivations. Usually in these kind of movies, they're trying to raise Satan or pull off some specific spell. The only thing we're told is that they're basically doing this for financial gain.
They're amassing wealth.
I think that's a really interesting direction to take. I don't know if that was sort of inspired by economic conditions in Italy at the time, that Argento was trying to say something with that.
The idea is that the three mothers were trying to control the world using three very different methods. I don't remember what all of the methods are, unfortunately, but Our Lady of Sighs she was the bank. She was amassing the money so that these other ladies could use that money to control different aspects of the world. And there's a deep preoccupation with money on the part of all of the girls training at the school. They want $50 up front. That's the way people do it here. And, one of the ballet dancers offers to sell Susie the shoes for a good price. And then Sarah mentions...
Do they shake you up with all that talk about money?
Well, I'm not exactly used to it.
Same with me at first. Then I found out it's a charming habit around here.
You get the idea that it's not just the witches proper who are affected by this lust for money. It's trickling down into the students, who we can assume in some way or another that they're complicit in this. They're complicit in the scheme of the witches.
The other question I had watching the movie, and now I'm starting to wonder about it, is what are their plans for these girls? I mean, is the dance academy just a front, or do they have specific plans? Because I realized Susie's aunt is somebody influential in the art circles.
Yes.
I remember that Madame Blanc mentions that, oh, she raised a ton of money for this charity or this art thing. And then Sarah's father is the consul for Italy.
Mm-hmm.
So they both have connections to somebody who is influential and powerful. So I'm almost wondering if they're grooming them to sort of spread their influence through these children.
I think that's part of it. I think part of it as well is training the next generation, because there are a few of those women who are cruel. They're so cruel. And I think they are being trained up into positions of power.
I wonder if it's almost
in
like
the coven.
If it's like the firm, this idea that eventually after a couple of years they revealed, okay, this is what you're really part of.
Maybe.
Are you in? It's like the mob. You can't go back now. You're part of it.
But also there's a greater mythology behind the Three Mothers trilogy. And I might get some of this wrong. I didn't think I was going to need this information, so I didn't do a lot of research on it.
I've still never seen the third one, so.
But I believe it was either Susie's mother or Susie's aunt who fought Our Lady of Sighs. And that's why in Suspiria she's so weak and able to be finished off by Susie herself.
Oh, I haven't gotten that far. I didn't hear that bit. Interesting.
So there's a greater mythology to why Susie. It gives her a very chosen one quality that we don't get from Suspiria, but we find out later.
And I kind of prefer it without that chosen one quality. But
yeah.
One other point I wanted to bring up with Nickelodeon, the end of the movie, the last scene with the confrontation with Marcos, it's incredibly strange, and supposedly partially it's because it came from a dream that she had as well. She had a dream of being in a room with an invisible witch with a jaguar that exploded.
Wow.
So what we get is, there's the invisible witch, there's the room, and a statue of a jaguar or a cat that explodes, because she couldn't find a reason in the script to put a cat in the scene otherwise. But again, the fact that so much of this comes from the writer's dreams and the director's dreams really adds to that sort of dream logic thing, that no, it doesn't totally make sense that this would happen and this would happen, but
it doesn't have to.
In a dream, you just accept it. You just kind of go, okay, they're evil, this is happening, I'm suddenly here now.
Right.
Let's move on to the cinematography by Luciano Tovoli, and whoa, talk about a beautiful movie, this one.
Oh my gosh. His reds, the only time he has perfect reds are when he is depicting blood, and it is that vibrant, just pure red. All of the other reds in the film are tipped to nearly hot pink, and it is so startling. It's a color you would never expect to see so prominent in a film like this, but just these glowing blues and this hot pink, just those are the main colors.
And from the moment she steps out of the airport and gets in the cab, when she's driving through and you see all these different colored lights being reflected by the rain, it's so gorgeous.
So she's entered a new world as soon as she steps off that plane. The color gives us a signal that, no, this is not reality. We are now in the fairy tale. And every time things happen that are strange, we get that light. We get one of those colored lights. The times that we see natural light are outside the school, outside the influence of the witches. When she's meeting with the professor, when she's meeting with the doctor, when we see Daniel in a pub, those are all times we don't have any of that light. It's all natural light.
And there's some interesting things where the light will suddenly change in the middle of the shot. I noticed a lot in the murder scenes when there's a stabbing, all of a sudden we'll get it'll be a red light and we'll get a blue light filling from the side. Or there's a moment when Susie's in her room right before the maggot thing and she's brushing her hair and there's this strong red light coming in through the window. And all of a sudden the next cut, it's blue.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation. It's right as the maggots start dropping. So I was starting to wonder if some of those color changes, if there's any kind of pattern to them. But I couldn't suss one out.
Besides those vibrant colors being used in scenes where, the witches are present or their influence is present, I couldn't find a specific pattern. But I did notice that to break up what could have been monotony of blue and pink, he would use orange. And then when strange things would happen, blue and orange, and those are opposites on the color wheel. They clash really horribly. So it's very pay attention to this moment in visual terms.
I noticed clashing red and green during certain scenes,
Right.
too. Just tiny little bits of green focusing on specific elements.
Yeah.
Supposedly, the color scheme of the movie was based on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Argento had Tivoli watch that in preparation.
Does not surprise me at all. Since we're talking about it now, in the cartoon, the Disney cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, there's this moment where Snow White has gotten into the forest and she's running through the forest and there's wind and the trees are grabbing her clothes. And her pose is the exact same one as Susie running down the hallway and the glass breaking around her toward the end of the movie. It's a small visual reminder. This is a fairy tale.
This is also supposedly the first Italian film to use the Steadicam.
Really?
And every once in a while I'd notice it, but it's not as overt as, say, like a John Carpenter movie or The Shining, where they're really showing you, look at the Steadicam, look how smoothly it's flowing.
Yeah.
Every once in a while during some of the scenes in the school, when one of the characters is running away and we're moving through the corridors, it's there. But it's not as quite as overt. It's a little more subtle, I think, than you normally see. Another moment I love is the moment where Susie has the knife flashed in her face and the whole screen goes white. And it looks like they very intentionally put a lot of dust in the set, because all of a sudden the light lights up all these dust particles, and it just gives that moment an extra little punch. The film was actually printed using the 3-strip Technicolor process to give the colors extra vibrance, and it was actually one of the last movies to be processed this way. I mean, this was the same Technicolor style they used for, like, Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, that really just made the colors bleed through, and it's really important here.
The color quality of films prior to this, and including this one, they were slightly unreal because of the vibrancy, but there are times I miss that vibrancy where I feel like a lot of films post Suspiria have lost their color. Especially, we briefly talked about this a few days ago, but the 90s got a very realistic color palette. Then we move into the early aughts and the late 90s when all of a sudden everything gets very dark and blue. And it was blue and
teal and orange.
Teal and orange, yes. And we kind of haven't moved out of that well yet. We're still stuck in this computer graded color scheme that makes everything look the same.
That's what kills me, is that in terms of the technique, that instead of using gels on lights and specifically going for this look, it's left in post. It's all digital grading where it's like, well, turn this red, make this blue, turn this up a little bit, turn this down. It feels like a lot of the process of cinematography has kind of gone out the window in favor of all the digital tools.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real loss.
And I feel like we tend to criticize some modern computer graphics and computer special effects, but there are times when it works really well, and I love computer-aided stuff, but it doesn't work for cinematography in the long run. You miss the kind of the painterly hands-on, like there was someone here who did this.
There was someone who had a very specific idea of what they were trying to do. They weren't waiting until later to figure it out. They had an idea when they hit the set.
It pulls cinematography out of the conversation, because now it's more the actors, the costumes, things that still have the human touch.
It also opens it up to being more cinematography by committee. The studio can look at it and decide, well, we want this to be this color now, or we want this to look different. It takes away the specificity of it, I think.
And that's probably how it all ends up looking the same.
Yeah. As for Tivoli, he actually worked with Argento again on Tenebrae and the unfortunate Dracula 3D movie he did. He also shot The Passenger for Michelangelo Antonioni, Reversal of Fortune and Single White Female for Barbet Schroeder, and Titus for Julie Taymor.
And Titus, I remember as being a gorgeous film as well.
Single White Female, too. It's a little bit more down-to-earth, but there's a gorgeous use of light in that movie. The movie was edited by Franco Fraticelli. He also collaborated with Argento going back to The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, continuing through Deep Red and Phenomena right up to Opera. I'd also edit movies for Lamberto Bava, including Demons 1 and 2. I love those movies. And Michel Soavi, including The Church and Cemetery Man. And I think a lot of his editing techniques actually contribute to that weird dream logic. Specifically, I remember a scene near the end where Susie is hiding from Pablo, and she suddenly turns and, with no explanation, she's in a room with the body of Sarah.
Yes.
That cut always makes me kind of like, whoa, how'd we get here? Things like that where all of a sudden we're just jumping into something very different.
My favorite editing moment is when Susie has been drugged from the wine and Sarah's in the room with her, the moment that Susie passes out, the screen goes black and you hear Sarah saying witch. And it is a beautiful cut.
This idea that subconsciously she's going to remember that later.
Yes.
Supposedly, because Argento shot very little footage, just a few takes because of the lack of film stock, the movie was edited very quickly in just about 2 weeks, which for a film of this complexity
insane.
Is nutty. There's so many cuts in this. That's really, really shocking.
Yeah.
The production design for the movie was by Giuseppe Bassan. Bassan also designed Deep Red and would work with Argento again on Tenebrae, as well as designing Umberto Lenzi's Cannibal Ferox.
Unfortunately, with a lot of Argento's films, no matter how many times I see them, if they're not Suspiria, I get the stories mixed up. So, Deep Red, if you would remind me, is that the one with the house where there's the mural under the wallpaper?
That's the one. That's the one.
Yeah, okay, so as far as production design goes, he's amazing. If you want things that are close enough to being real, that are just terrifying, that's the man to go to. I'm thinking specifically of Deep Red and that moment where they peel the wallpaper off and you're seeing all of these horrific childhood drawings. And in Suspiria, a lot of what we see, they're normal things. I mean, I will say that an entire room of chicken wire is not normal, but, boxes and an Art Deco appearance and things that take on a sinister appearance. Plus, and this is probably, I'm going to talk about more about illusion and the trick of the eye later, but he was responsible for the Escher-like wallpaper in one of Susie's rooms. I don't remember which room it was, but it's the birds and fish. And the birds connect in a way that create the fish in the negative space, or is it the fish that are creating the birds in the negative space? And that's already an illusion. So it's a reminder. It's a subtle reminder. This is fake. This is an illusion. This is not real. And we get the same thing in two other instances with the wallpaper or with wall painting. In Susie's room in the academy, the wallpaper appears to be snakeskin, which is just another reminder of the snake theme.
The stairs, they have those,
the
rather
banisters.
than straight slats, they have the banisters that look like curling snakes.
Yeah. The coven is referred to as like a snake. The headmistress, or rather the queen, being the head of the snake, and the rest of the coven is the snake. So if you cut off the head, the rest of them are useless. And we see that played out.
Yeah, as Marcos is dying, the rest of the coven seems to be dying as well.
Right.
It almost looks like from the same wound, because I notice you can see Madame Blanc holding her neck where the stab wound was.
Yes. And also, the room where the irises are, where they turn, I think it's Madame Blanc's sitting room. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly what room it is. The walls are an Escher-like replication of the maze-like room where the stairs don't go anywhere and the doors go through other ways. And that's another reminder, this is an illusion, this is not real, and this place is a maze. It's a trap.
I was also really impressed by the scenes in the apartment where Pat gets murdered.
Yes.
As soon as she walks in the lobby, everything is composed of these really sharp angles. Even the elevator indicator is a triangle. And when she goes into the apartment, all these angled surfaces, the windows have this angle pattern on them, this almost arrowhead pattern. It just says violence in it. It says that something really horrible is going to happen to this person.
She's being warned. And again, we have that really vibrant, vivid color. This building, this off-campus building, is also under the influence of the witches.
And yet, when we go into the school, the corridors, there's a lot more of a focus on curves. Like the windows over the door, where normally those would be square in most places, at least in the girls' apartments, they're these weird, curvy, circular kind of designs.
The architecture and even the font of the title credits takes on a very Art Deco appearance, and Art Deco, it's dreamy, it's beautiful, and it was considered more of a decorative art than a fine art. I know the perception of that is changing a bit.
Let's move on to the music, credited to Dario Argento, and it's credited to The Goblins, but it's supposed to be just Goblin, obviously.
It's terrifying, but it has a lullaby quality to it. It is chilling. It's one of the best horror movie scores.
It's so distinctive. I mean, it's right up there with, I think, the Psycho score and Jaws. As soon as you hear it, you're like, oh, Suspiria, great.
Yeah.
You can't help but do the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, or just walk around going, witch. I'd love to know what he's saying. Claudio Simonetti does the vocals on the main Suspiria theme, and he says it's gibberish, but I swear listening to it, I keep thinking he's actually making words and sentences. But I don't know what they are.
I haven't been able to make it out at all.
It's creepier, the fact that you don't know. It almost sounds like it's somebody chanting a spell,
It's
and
subliminal.
you can't quite make it out.
And it's visually echoed toward the end of the film. She walks down a corridor that ends in the chamber of the Black Queen. You know, the walls that she's walking through, it is just carved with words like divination, Satan, Helena Marco. And some of them appear to be in maybe fake Latin or Italian. I think I saw some Hebrew writing. So it's all of these different languages reminding you that what she stands for is a worldwide concept.
Supposedly, the music was actually written before shooting so they could play it at full blast on the set to scare the actors during certain takes.
That's cruel. That is Kubrick level cruel.
But it really works. There's certain scenes, especially Daniel's death scene, where it almost feels like the characters are being assaulted by the music. Like they can hear it because they look like they're reacting to the music itself.
Yeah.
I also really love the cutting of the music during the airport scene. We'll cut to a shot of Susie walking toward the door, and it's just normal noise, and then cut to the door and the outside world beyond, and we hear the theme again. Then cut back, and it keeps kind of turning on and off. The music, again, suggesting what you mentioned before, that she's about to enter this whole different world, the same way the cinematography enhances that. The music has been used in other movies, especially in Hong Kong, including Dance of the Drunk Mantis and We Are Going to Eat You, and the cartoon Invader Zim is used a couple times as well, supposedly. The website Pitchfork named the main theme as one of the best songs of 1977 to 1979.
Wow.
It's been sampled by a bunch of hip-hop artists, too, including Ghostface Killah and RJD2. And I love this. The theme was used for a synchronized swimming display by the Russian team in the 2012 Olympics.
And we'll have a clip of that up.
Yeah. It's so great. I just imagine the people in this Olympic arena being like, what the hell is this? Because it still had the whispering and the witch every once in a while.
It's synchronized swimming. It's great that they can do it, but it's not a particularly romantic sport. But it turns it into this very disturbing dance.
I love it whenever an Olympic athlete uses some bit of recognizable movie scoring. Unfortunately, the only other one that comes to mind is Tonya Harding doing like the raptor theme from Jurassic Park. All right, now we get into the themes and meaning parts.
There are so many.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start with the big one, the kind of fairy tale aspects of the movie?
Sure. First and foremost, this takes place in Germany, and there's a strong tie to traditional, or what we consider traditional fairy tales in Germany, the Grimm's brothers.
Yeah.
Especially.
The Brothers Grimm.
The Brothers Grimm.
They will tell us the story, yeah.
So that starts us off with Snow White, of course, which we've touched on a little bit, but just the appearance of Susie. Dark hair, very pale, huge eyes. She is Snow White, and she's entered the forest. We literally have to go through a forest to get to the school.
Not to mention at the airport, as she's going out the door, there's a big sign for something that says Black Forest right on it.
Yes, yeah.
Also, the fact that, like Snow White and like Sleeping Beauty for that matter, she's to some degree put to sleep by a spell.
Yes.
She's poisoned.
Yes, she's literally the poison wine, the poison apple. The movie is given an introduction. We're given a prologue. There's a voiceover that gives us context that she's arrived at this school at this time. It's almost like a once upon a time. And once upon a time, there was a girl who was on a plane, and that plane landed at 10:40 to go to this dance school kind of thing. So even before the movie has truly begun, we're reminded this is an illusion. And then we've got a little touch of Cinderella with the preoccupation with time. Clocks and time are mentioned several times with no real connection that I can think of. The first time it's mentioned is during the prologue, that she arrived at 10:40. And then there's the clock on Sarah's lighter. And there's also the teachers who leave at 9:30 just like clockwork. And I'm not sure if there's any real connection or if that was just a happenstance. There's obviously Hansel and Gretel, the idea that she's been lured in with dance and it's a trap for her. It's not said overtly, but I think she was invited so that they could destroy her.
Well, with the backstory you mentioned in the wider mythology, that would definitely make sense.
Right. And then there are two that they're not quite traditional fairy tales, but they're strong. There's Alice in Wonderland. There's the use of drugs and drugs making things different. The idea that they're smaller. All of the women are smaller. They're treated as children. And some of this is being able to grow up. She's uprooted into a new world that doesn't make sense, which is the theme shared with The Wizard of Oz. And the idea that she has to leave home, have this experience, and then go back home. There's also the witch, of course, because most fairy tales have witches. But there's something very interesting as well with Iris. Irises are a big theme in this movie. Obviously, the iris is the gateway. They literally have to turn an iris to reveal a hidden door. But the word iris, it references the Greek goddess of the rainbow. She has to go through the rainbow, or rather over the rainbow, to find the witch.
Into a corridor with gold walls.
Exactly. So that kind of transitions well into the iris as a theme. There was an ancient belief that the iris serves as a warning to be heeded. She does not heed any of these warnings at all. She is warned by the irises immediately before even going in, and then she's warned again through the intercom to go away. And she trespasses. And that's, again, part of a cycle of a fairy tale, is that you are given a warning and then you trespass that warning. Irises also appear in the scene when Susie is talking on the phone with Dr. Mandel. And there's a bouquet of irises. So we're told again, this is the fairy tale. She's not in the real world. Even though she is contacting someone from the real world, she's mired. And at the heart, this movie is a mystery. What happened to Pat? What happened to Susie? Where do the teachers go at night? So it's a series of mysteries, as well as a fairy tale, as well as a horror film.
It's interesting how those mysteries kind of change, though, too. Like, exactly who killed Pat almost goes by the wayside as the story gets on. We don't really need to know. I always suspected it was Pablo, the big, creepy Richard Keel-looking dude, just because when we see the killer attacking Pat, we see these big hairy arms. And I noticed these really creepy nails that almost look demonic. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, all right, maybe it's some entity that they conjured up to do it.
I'm not sure if it's a specific person or if it's, like you said, an entity. But I think the use of the nails and the hairy arms was, maybe it's a woman, maybe it's a man. Kind of throw us off a little bit. So I think we should talk a little about the use of shadow. There are two instances that I can think of offhand that were just brilliant. In the very beginning, when Susie's in the taxi and we're going through the woods, there's a very distinct shadow on one of the trees. And we did pause it and do a frame by frame because that's what we do. And it appeared to be the shadow of an arm holding a dagger or a sword.
That's what it looked like to me, but it's one of those things where it could be a case of pareidolia. We're just kind of seeing what we want to see.
But that fits with this movie.
It does.
In a way I'll get into after we talk about the shadow behind the curtain when they're in the dormitory.
Oh, I love that bit.
And how that's, again, a very convenient set piece for the story to move forward. But they're using this shadow as a backdrop to the scary story they're telling each other. So it heightens the sense of the imagination running away with itself.
I also like that neither of the girls seem to really acknowledge the shadow. They talk about how they're hearing a noise behind the curtain, but don't really seem to mention the fact that you can see this shadow projected on it. Almost like, is this really happening, or is this being sort of projected in their minds as to what's going on behind that curtain?
Or if it does exist, they're too scared to turn and look at it.
Which also has kind of a fairy tale aspect to it, or a mythological aspect.
And that's seeing. Eyes and seeing. And lack of sight. Of course, we have the pianist who's blind, and he can see the academy for what it is, basically. He hears it. So we kind of get the idea that hearing is also seeing. There are all these eyes that the characters see, orange eyes, right before they die or right before they're attacked. Pat sees them, and so does Susie. The irises, as in your irises in the eyes for seeing, and the irises being able to see is what lets Susie through the hidden door. Every time Susie realizes something or learns a vital piece of information within the school, the irises are involved. Either we see them or we hear about them. Susie literally sees the light when the dagger is shined on her, and it makes her sick. She sees what's going on. There's something really strange here, and it makes her ill.
Which, that moment, I was always curious as to whether that was them doing it on purpose to make her sick, or if it's just a matter of she gets a flash of what's really happening.
I do have a little more to talk about that in a minute, but
Okay.
I want to finish with the eyes.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
The peacock feathers. In the peacock at the very end, it's this very ornate kind of sculpture, and the feathers, when you pull them out, they're like pin daggers.
A bird with crystal plumage, dare I say?
You might say that. But the peacock feathers themselves have the appearance of an eye in the feathers. And then over the bed of the Black Queen is the pyramid with the eye in it that also is on our dollar bills.
The all-seeing eye.
Yes,
yeah.
but it also, because it's on the American dollar bill, besides having a lot to do with the theme of eyes and seeing, it has to do with the theme of money.
I'd also throw in that when we see Sarah's corpse, she has things embedded into her eyeballs.
Yes, she has these
She's
pins.
seen too much.
Exactly. So one of the most interesting parts of this movie for me is the aspect of illusion. Are we seeing what we're seeing? Is any of this true? And we are hinted that it's an illusion several times with the wallpaper and with, I don't think they're red herrings, but they do cast a shadow of doubt. When Pat looks out the window just before she's attacked, she's looking at clothing blowing in the breeze, clothing on a clothesline, and she's staring intently at it. She might see something through it. We don't know. I don't think she knows until she's attacked. So is she seeing things, and what we're seeing is what she's seeing, or is she manifesting this through her imagination? This goes further with the dagger that the light is shined into the face of Susie. Is she getting a migraine? Is that migraine making her ill from that flash of light? Or has a spell been put on her? It's very childlike in the idea that, oh yes, a spell has been put on me, I'm weak and ill and I can't go on. But what if it was just a migraine?
That also goes into the fact that she's not totally sensible during a lot of it, where she's under this medication and she's drowsy. Sometimes she can hear things really well, like the footsteps. Sometimes she's not totally conscious of what's happening.
Right.
So is there a certain point after which the rest of the movie is some kind of bizarre fever dream she's having as a result of this?
Exactly. The credibility of our main character is called into deep question. There are lots of moments where we might be able to excuse something that's seen or something that's happened as a trick of the eye or imagination getting the best of them. And they work themselves up. All of these girls who have heard the story work themselves up. They get more paranoid. They get more frightened. They think things are missing and that people are after them. And I'm not completely convinced that's actually what's going on. I think that's what we're being shown as an audience, but I think there's a deeper layer.
It goes to Daniel, too. We never actually see the dog attack against Madame Blanc's nephew. It could be his dog has really gone wild.
Yes.
And it just kills him because it is now a feral animal. We're never totally sure.
Yeah, possibly the dog now has a taste for blood.
Mm-hmm. Or decide it wanted to be liberated from its slavery.
Mm-hmm. And maybe Sarah wasn't being chased by someone. Maybe she was really just... Because we're told that she was treated for a mental breakdown. Maybe she's relapsing. Maybe she drove herself into such a frenzy that she really did get herself trapped in a room that turned out to be dangerous.
It also could be, because this does happen, that hanging around somebody that has a delusion, sometimes the delusion can spread to another person.
Exactly.
Maybe
and that's
Susie absorbed it that way.
A shared delusion, and that's how it went from Pat to Sarah, who is vulnerable, to Susie, who is in a very new situation and has become very ill immediately.
It does leave the last shot of the movie, put it into a different context, that we might be seeing the smile of a disturbed pyromaniac who's just destroyed her school.
Exactly. I mean, also the idea that she sees the witches plotting against her. If she's ill and she's under the influence of medication, what if that's not what's really happening? What if she has just gone in and stabbed the headmistress of her new school and then torched the place?
There's a lot of scenes I noticed could be taken different ways, that it could be something very normal and perfectly fine, or something really sinister. And I like that the film keeps that going for quite a while until Susie really gets into investigating things, that there could be a rational explanation for a lot of things that happen.
There could be a rational explanation for all of it if we remember that our point of view characters they're all unreliable.
Shall we get into some trivia? Or?
Sure.
For the scene where the maggots are dropping from the ceiling, bits of rice were actually used to stand in for them for the wide shots, with actual maggots for the close-ups. And I gotta admit, that scene where they're trumping through the attic and actually apparently squashing real maggots, that disturbed me a little bit.
I cringe every time I see it. And I know they're maggots, but it bothers me.
You could not do that in America. I remember hearing that on the Shawshank Redemption, the scene where they feed a maggot to the bird, they actually had to find a dead maggot, and they were not allowed to shoot a live one.
Yeah.
Actor Fulvio Mingozi actually plays a cab driver in both this and Inferno.
That's interesting. That creates a new angle on his character.
That maybe he's some otherworldly being escorting these people into these confrontations.
Kind of like of the River Styx.
Charon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ferrying them to the underworld.
Or it could be Argento just really likes that actor, and this is his limited skill set. He plays ornery cab drivers.
Let me go with it. Okay.
Fine.
Let me have this one.
I do love that scene where she keeps saying the word for where she wants to go, and he's not getting it. She shows him the piece of paper, and he says right back, "Oh yeah, that, fine." Also note that in that scene, you can actually see Argento's face reflected in the glass partition of the taxi cab. Argento later claimed this was not a mistake, but was intentional. I kind of go back and forth between being able to see it and not being able to see it. I missed it this time.
I didn't see it.
I know it's in there. There's one shot where you can see him. There's also a shot when she's talking to Professor Milius outside at the conference scene where you can see Argento in a t-shirt reflected in the building behind them.
Huh.
Unfortunately, they are planning a remake of this movie, or have been for many, many years. Supposedly, David Gordon Green was going to do it, and this was right after Black Swan hit, so I guess they figured, find us another creepy, hallucinogenic, dance-related movie. Now it's supposed to be directed by Luca Guadagnino, who filmed that movie I Am Love, which actually is really good.
I've never seen that one.
With Tilda Swinton, who also starred in that, and Dakota Johnson. Argento's commented on it and just says he really doesn't see a need for it, and I got to agree. I mean, the strength of this movie is Argento's directing. I mean, let's face it, the script is interesting, but it's not really something that's super, super strong and intricate.
If they... there's some movies I don't think they should bother trying to remake. There are movies that are legitimately, they were good ideas but didn't work, that I would rather they try to remake before Suspiria. Because, like you said, the story itself is pretty derivative in general, but it's the style of the movie that saves it. The style, the acting of those particular actors, the color.
The cinematography, the music,
right,
yeah.
Right. So I don't think they'll be able to create the same magic now. They would have to go in a completely different direction. The way they tell the story, they can't have this fantastic stuff happening the way that it happens in modern films. It would just be boring.
And honestly, I think it would end up being so different, there's no reason to make it Suspiria other than the name value, you know?
Yeah.
If you're going to remake Argento, there's plenty of other movies I think that actually could stand from a different version.
Yeah.
Phenomena has some great ideas, but also kind of goes off the track. I think you could do that one.
I could definitely see Deep Red being redone and redone well.
Yeah, absolutely. This one, it's too much tied with him.
Yeah.
A couple other random things. The scene with the bat. What is up with the scene with the bat? Is it just they needed one more scare or something?
It may have been. I don't know. Maybe they wanted to bring back the idea that there were eyes, watching her, something looking at her.
Maybe this is like one of the witch's manifestations of them trying to kill her, that it's a poison bat or something, or it's going to gore her to death.
Or maybe another instance of her going overboard with something that just happened. I mean, it's a big old place. There's a bat. The bat just happens to attack her when she's freaking out about other stuff.
I just couldn't help it. It looked like it was trying to like say something to her, like, hey, because it's always right next to her ear, like, hey, how's it going?
It didn't work.
It's not a great effect, first of all.
It was the clunkiest part of this movie. The special effect did not work. Jessica Harper sold the hell out of it, acting-wise, but that bat, it was so obviously a toy. And it broke the illusion for me.
And the scene where she kills it, especially after seeing all these adorable internet videos of baby bats eating, I'm just like, I get heartbroken when she stomps it with that stool. I'm like, no, just throw it out the window. Let him go.
I've seen this movie so many times, and every time I see it, when she drops the blanket or the towel over it, I'm like, oh good, she's humanely doing it. And it's a toy.
Nope. Yeah.
It is very much a toy. I know it is, but nope, she covers it with a towel and then she stomps it with a stool.
It's such a weird, isolated scene that doesn't really seem to have a connection to anything else in the movie.
Yeah.
It just always strikes me as odd, because I always forget it. And then the movie's on like, oh yeah, the bat. Weird. One other observation I noticed, I love the fact that the end of the movie is sort of the beginning of the movie.
It is.
Rainstorm and somebody fleeing out of this academy, just an entirely different context. Okay, what is your favorite scene from the movie?
Oh, there's so many scenes. I'm going to go with the scene of Jessica Harper running out of the academy down that hall, that Snow White shot, because it encapsulates the mood. Like, if you see that, you know she's fleeing from some kind of threat in the house, possibly the house itself, and the colors are so striking that if you saw that scene out of context, you'd understand.
For me, I think I'd have to go with the dormitory scene where they're all bunking down for the night. And I love that moment where the lights shut off. And when the lights are on, it's just this normal room with sheets set up and little bunks and all the girls are tucked in. Looks very normal. As soon as the lights go out and all of a sudden we have these red lights behind the curtains, it has this really creepy, hellish, sinister look. And just the image of Helena Marcos, or what might be Helena Marcos, settling in behind the curtain and being right there as they're having this discussion.
You hear that snoring? It's weird. Hear it? Where do you think it's coming from? Behind the sheet.
It's beautiful and creepy.
It is absolutely gorgeous. It's just a nice kind of distillation of the plot into one visual.
Now, there's something we forgot to talk about that you sort of brought up. Whenever it goes dark, and there are so many dark scenes in this movie, the lights are turned out and then the colored lights are brought on. And they're not as vibrant as they had been during any of the day scenes, but it gives us enough light to see what's going on, and it's adding a mood.
And again, it suggests this idea that we're going from normal reality into the imagined.
Yeah, if I could nerd out for a second, in Castlevania, Simon's Quest, occasionally it's a terrible night for a curse, pops up on the screen, and we go from daytime, where you're in a town and everything's, pretty hunky-dory, and then all of a sudden it's a night scene, and the music changes, and the people change into these kind of Medusa-like zombie ghosts, and I get the same feel out of that. I mean, that used to chill me when I was a kid playing that game. I never wanted it to be night in that game.
Shall we move into recommendations?
Yeah.
Okay, if somebody liked this movie, and I certainly hope they do, coming as somebody who took a little while to get there, but definitely does, What else do you think people might like?
The Phantom of the Paradise. Not just for Jessica Harper or the crazy songs that span all genres, but their use of color and set pieces and costuming is so similar. When I think of Suspiria, I immediately think of the Phantom of the Paradise because of that red. They're both saturated with red.
And as someone who you've converted to that movie, I heartily agree. Anything else?
Watch more Argento to see how well the color is used and just how beautifully he directs dreamlike states.
I'd have two on completely different tracks. On a straight plot-related idea, I'd recommend The Woods by Lucky McGee, his second movie, with Agnes Bruckner and Patricia Clarkson. Has a very similar idea of this student going into this school where something really odd and spooky is going on behind the scenes that we're not quite totally aware of for a long time. It also features Bruce Campbell. It's a really interesting, odd little movie that kind of got lost in the 2000s shuffle, but worth seeking out. In terms of the look of the film, I'd have to go with The Mask of the Red Death, the Roger Corman one with Vincent Price.
Absolutely.
Those incredibly strong, vibrant colors. Anytime they're in the school, I kept thinking of the original story with the idea of these windows, different colored windows lit from behind that would make the room all this color, all that color. It brings that to mind a lot. And that movie, with cinematography by Nicholas Roeg before he started directing himself, is absolutely gorgeous and has the same kind of strange hallucinogenic elements to the plot as well. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to say about Suspiria, or do you think we've covered it all?
I think we've covered it pretty well.
I think so. Definitely one to check out, especially as we're moving into the Halloween season. All right, that ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Suspiria or feel that we missed something, check out the comments section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us, and if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review there. Your reviews help increase our visibility, and we appreciate any feedback you can offer. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening. Remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than just what's on the screen.
Witch.
God damn it. What? I knew you were going to do that, and I was like, I'm going to do it too at the same time. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it.
You want to coordinate it? Or?
Yes. Witch.